There is growing evidence that suggests to me that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is going to run for Chuck Schumer's Senate seat in 2028. Now, I am far from the first person to suggest that this might be happening, but if this ends up being true, which I think it will at this point, it means we are due for a serious infight within the Democratic Party that we really don't see all that often in modern American politics. It would also take AOC out of the running for the 2028 presidential contest. So I want to go over all of the reasons why I think this is happening, everything I think it entails for the broader political landscape within the Democratic Party and at large, and what I think the outcome of this fight will potentially be. I know we're a few years out, but I think there are some conclusions we can logically jump to with what we know about the Democratic Party, what we know about New York City politics, and what we know about intra-party Democratic politics right now. So let's get right into it. I know for my regular viewers, I said I was going to cover the California gubernatorial race, but with Eric Swalwell's sudden dropout of the race, I'm waiting for some numbers to come in before we jump to conclusions on what's happening there. I think that could be really useful, so stay tuned and subscribe. So a lot of my reporting here comes from two articles out of Axios, like we can see here, with this article talking mostly about Chuck Schumer's current popularity. Can you guess how popular he is? Not very. According to the past 6 months of Siena polling, Chuck Schumer's approval rating never hovers any higher than 40%. As of March 2026, we're looking at highs around 42% and lows around 32% approval. That's lower than the president. And this is for Chuck Schumer in New York State. And in case you think this is just how Chuck Schumer is with the people he represents, no. Chuck Schumer was at a 53% approval rating at this point in Trump's first term. Now, with the national favorability of Democrats at around 43%, this puts Chuck Schumer well below that number. So he's up for re-election in November of 2028 and will be 75 years old this November. I know I just threw so many numbers at you, but trust me, we're just about over the hedge. If Chuck Schumer stays in the race, which is far from a guarantee, we would expect him to go pretty hard at this. Chuck Schumer is very invested in his elections. He has toured all 62 New York counties for 27 straight years. That's a pledge from his 1998 Senate run. So you may be asking at this point, what is making Chuck Schumer this unpopular? A couple things, but mainly his performance with the budget bill in November of 2025. The Republican spending bill that passed last year ended a bunch of additional subsidies for the Affordable Care Act. These subsidies were so large that about 20 million Americans are expected to face premium hikes this year on their health insurance. So the Democrats decided to pounce on this, shutting down the government for over 40 days. Now, a little after the 40-day mark, making it the longest shutdown in U.S. history, 8 Democrats and 1 independent who caucuses with the Democrats decided to end the shutdown. Now, publicly, Schumer voted against reopening the government, but reporting from several outlets found that he was constantly in contact with this caucus of rogue Democrats, and that he tacitly approved the deal. And the timing made it worse. Democrats had performed extremely well in the recent November elections. This is when Zoran Mamdani won in New York City, and the Democrats saw huge overperformances in Virginia and New Jersey. And this wasn't the first time Chuck Schumer had caved in the second Trump administration. Earlier in the year, in March 2025, he publicly backed a GOP spending bill to keep the government from shutting, basically giving up any leverage at that point against the Trump administration. Now, around November 2025, when the Democrats cave in to end the shutdown, we see Schumer's numbers drop to an all-time low. That's that 32% number. And since that point, several House Democrats are now calling for Schumer's resignation, or at least his removal as minority leader in the Senate, currently the most powerful federal position for any Democrat at the federal level. These House members include Ro Khanna, Rashida Tlaib, and Saikat Chakrabarti. That's AOC's former chief of staff, who's now running in San Francisco. Keep that one in mind. Now, what has AOC been doing during this time? You may have seen from reporting, from social media videos, that AOC has been touring the country on a fighting oligarchy rally with Bernie Sanders off and on over the last year. Now, these fighting oligarchy rallies were national. They were taking place in states across the country, notably a lot of swing states. Now, this combined with early polling for 2028 presidential Democratic nominees, which put her in the upper echelon for candidates at the time, and even now, it all sort of came together to make it seem as if AOC was very much planning a presidential run in 2028. I mean, my first big video in the political landscape was ranking the 2028 Democratic candidates, and I had put AOC at the top at the time. This was around a year ago. Now, where do I think this maybe started to change? I think it happened in Munich of all places. That's right, Munich, Germany. AOC had lined up to speak at the Munich Security Conference in February of 2026. Now, this is a pretty major foreign trip, especially for a House member. I think many political commentators at the time had theorized that this was sort of establishing foreign policy credit ahead of a 2028 run, as AOC is traditionally very focused on domestic issues. Unfortunately, this is not where the story ends in Munich. During the conference, she was asked directly about the US's involvement in a possible invasion of Taiwan by China, basically asking if the US should send troops to defend the island. And her response was, all right, let me just read it. God, I don't want to, but I have no other way of describing this. AOC's response was, quote, I think that this is such, I think that this is of course a very long-standing policy of the United States. And I think what we are hoping for is that we want to make sure that we never get to that point. And we want to make sure that we are moving in all of our economic research and our global positions to avoid any such confrontation and for that question to even arise. I don't want to harp on this too much. It was a bad stumble. Now, this combined with reportedly saying that Venezuela is, quote, below the equator. It isn't, by the way. Did I know that? Not important. I'm not running for president. I think if you're a Democratic insider watching this performance and you control any real funding levers within the party, if you were considering sponsoring a 2028 run for AOC, this might have given you pause. Now, this is all speculative, of course, but I just think it's important to have this framing because what we see next is a pivot to what a Senate candidate might do instead of what a presidential candidate might do from AOC. Now, in July of 2024, the National Democratic Socialists withdrew their endorsement of AOC by citing her vote to fund Israel's Iron Dome. And recently, AOC has done a lot of work to mend this relationship. Last month, AOC did a virtual forum with the New York Democratic Socialists, the branch that Zohran Mamdani had been a very prolific player in. This was an important meeting because she absolutely flipped the decision that she had made in 2024. She committed to voting against any U.S. funding for Israel, defensive or offensive. And this seems to have worked. Last week, the New York City Democratic Socialists agreed to endorse her for her next House run this November. Now, you may have noticed an interesting caveat with the socialist groups I was talking about. The initial withdrawing of an endorsement was done by the National Democratic Socialists, but the sort of path that AOC has taken to mend her relationship has taken place entirely within the New York City Democratic Socialist organization. I think focusing on this local chapter specifically is flagging a potential Senate run over a presidential run. Now, there are not a ton of polling numbers for a potential Senate race between these two candidates, but I do think the two major polls that we glean off of do give us a sight of what this race might look like. The first one was a Data for Progress poll that took place in March 2025. Now, this was fielded before the first capitulation by Chuck Schumer. And even then, the top line numbers show AOC with 55% of the vote compared to Chuck Schumer's 36%. Now, if we look at the second poll, which took place from Newsweek in May of 2025, again, almost a year old at this point, we have AOC polling in at 54% and Schumer at 33%. That's 21 points in AOC's favor. I think if a poll were to be taken today like this, we would see the numbers even worse for Schumer, as his approval rating has gone down since then. So yes, if I were AOC's strategist, I would consider running in this race. AOC is going to have a much harder time running for president. It's just a different electorate than New York State. And I think it's clear that her politics lean more with this lefter cohort that she can win over in New York much easier. Keep in mind, AOC is only 36 years old this year. If she declines to run in 2028 for president, there's a chance the next time she could run for president might not be until 2036 if a Democrat serves the next 2 terms. Under that scenario, she is still 46 years old. That's just about the age that Barack Obama was when he was elected in 2008. And to be completely honest, I think if you look back on the Obama presidency, there's an argument he was maybe elected a little young. There's a common understanding in American politics that being president is the last job you're really going to have. And with Obama leaving office barely being 56 years old, it's really left the party in a weird spot because he is the most prolific, most talented communicator within the party, and yet he's used so sparingly because he's already used up 8 years of the presidency. For all the advocates of an AOC 2028 presidential campaign, and even a 2036 presidential campaign, I would advise you to consider the downsides of spending out your candidate this early in their political career. I don't know AOC, I don't know her ambitions, but it seems to me the way she talks about her policy priorities, that it's just as important for her to pass these policies as it is to reform the Democratic Party advocating for or against them. There's a lot more work to be done there as Speaker of the House or the Majority Leader in the Senate one day. I'd be interested to see how this goes. But the last thing I want to touch on before we end today's video is about the Democratic Socialists. I'm just fascinated by the Axios article about AOC's attempt to get their endorsement. I think there's a real chance the Democratic Socialists, at least in New York City or New York State at large, are becoming a real influential group within that state's Democratic primary system. Let me give you some numbers before I go. The New York City Democratic Socialist chapter membership roughly doubled in summer of 2025. It went from roughly 5,500 around May to over 14,000 by February of 2026. The National Democratic Socialists saw their numbers go up by 25% of total membership between October 2025 and February 2026. They're calling it a Mamdani bump. There was a similar yet smaller bump in 2018 when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was elected, called the AOC bump. And the numbers really don't lie on the scale of the New York City Democratic Socialists. Mamdani won the New York City mayoral race last year by 1 million votes. For reference, AOC's district sees anywhere from 110 to 220,000 each election cycle. That's giving the Democratic Socialist of New York an electoral footprint 5 times the size of AOC's own base. As of August 2025, 250 plus DSA members held public office nationally, with 90% elected after 2019. And at the 2025 DSA convention, the group passed a resolution to run a Democratic Socialist candidate for president in 2028, citing the Mamdani model. I think the growth of influence of this group is fascinating. I think these numbers for growth and AOC's pretty large and public attempt to have them come back and endorse her show that this endorsement isn't just nice to have for a state-level race. It is a tangible, possibly needed endorsement to get to run as a left-wing candidate in 2026 and 2028. So I am very interested to see what this group does nationally and in New York City and state going forward. Watch out for their candidates. Watch out for who they endorse. Anyway, that's all I have for today. Let me know what you think of this video. Let me know what videos you want to see next. This video was kind of brought up by a comment in one of the previous videos. There are so many races to cover this year, and I am so excited to get to cover these. Yeah, let me know what you want to see. All right, see you soon.